Welcome everyone to Deep Drinks Podcast, the deepest podcast on the internet. There is no eternal soul in the Hebrew Bible, none. When you died, your body would go to the grave. No heaven, no hell, no eternal bliss or infinite punishment for a finite crime. Both Christianity and Islam claim to have come from this religious tradition, yet both are convinced that when we die, our souls will either be rewarded or punished, sometimes for eternity. Thanks everyone for coming out. My guest today is Dr. Mathew Philip Monger, who is the Associate Professor of Near Eastern Languages and Literature at MF Norwegian School of Theology. Mathew's main research interests are in the languages and texts of the ancient Near East, including Akkadian, Hebrew, Syriac/Aramaic, Ethiopic, and Arabic, and the intersection of these texts in these languages. Mathew is also the Program Director for MF's Bachelor degree in Theology, Religion, and Society. You may have seen Dr. Mathew Monger as a panelist on the recent slavery panel, and you'll see him again because we're doing another slavery panel in Aftermath to make sure we really nail home some of the apologetics. So that said, I'd like to welcome my new friend, Dr. Mathew Monger. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
First of all, thank you so much for coming on. And I've already said that, but what are we drinking today?
Yeah, you know, it's 9 a.m. here in Oslo, and I can't drink at work anyway, so we're just going to go for a brand that and there's actually a good backstory to using this too, because so we're going to do Coke, and
sweet.
And so I remember actually as a youth, I did this youth with a mission thing. It's
Why Wham?
Why Wham? Yeah, and in Why Wham, it's this mission thing. You're like, I mean, it's really about kids getting discipled or brought into the church is what it's about. But like you do it in this guise of you're going to go out and save the world. And one of the things that they use is this idea that they want that Coke has done it. Coke has reached the ends of the earth, and so we just need to be like Coke. Because you can be in any random village anywhere in the world, and there will be a Coke sign, and you can walk in and buy glass bottles or cans of Coke. And so, like, let's follow the Coke model and just get out there. So I figure,
wow, that's great. Is the idea behind YWAM? I don't know too much about it. I have been to a few things, but is the idea behind it like once we preach the gospel to all the world, then the end will come? Like, is it like we're trying to evangelize?
Yeah, I mean that's at least the narrative that I was given within it, was kind of like this: we have to fulfill the Great Commission in order to bring Jesus back, because that's what everybody wants. It's like the goal was the apocalypse, basically.
So Dr. Kip Davis says, wait, you don't drink at work?
The official line is that we don't drink at MF.
MF, okay.
Thanks.
I actually went along with a youth pastor from our area to a YWAM to speak. And I remember that I wasn't speaking, he was speaking, but I came along with him. And I told him the story on the way there about how there's no toilet paper in the toilets because each of the missionary kids is taught to use, or at least at this base, to have their own toilet paper and to only use a certain amount because that's what they have to get to use overseas. Yeah. So the first youth pastor went there, no toilet paper, and he had to use his socks, right? I told this story to the next youth pastor that I was in the car with. And he was like, oh, okay. And then he's like, oh no, I actually need to go to the toilet. And he took his little notebook and ran up to the toilet. And if he didn't have that notebook, he'd have to use his socks as well. So I don't know what it was about this one YWAM camp that everyone needs to like suddenly go crap themselves. But yeah, this is what happened. And I saved a man from having to use his socks. So
well, it's just such a weird thing, because one of the first things we had to learn when we moved to Africa was that there isn't toilet paper in the bathrooms, but but there's a little, like, it's a little plastic pot, like it's, you have water, and like, so you're supposed to use your hand, and then you wash your hand afterward. So like you use water in your hand, so, and you, yeah.
So you kind of give yourself like
give yourself a bidet bath,
like a 5% of your body bath with.
Yeah, I mean, so you would clean up after yourself, and then you make sure you wash your hands really well, and that's just the way it was. I mean, like most, yeah. So I think, like, I think that YWAM base probably would have had outreach to places where you would, like, if you didn't carry toilet paper all around, you would be stuck.
And that's, yeah.
But the better thing is to learn what locals do, because they don't use toilet paper. They clean themselves with water after doing their business. And so it's like, it's actually better to learn how to deal with the situation in the way that is most, like, I guess, so convenient. Like, so by carrying around toilet paper, you look like such a nerd. Like, you would walk, I mean, you just like walk into a village, like, hey, I've got my toilet paper, I'm here to be.
It's like one of those like European, like the bags that people bring to Europe or whatever, like a little bum bag with like your photo ID and you're like, it's like one of them, but you got like a pouch with toilet paper.
Yeah,
but
as we call it in American English, a fanny pack.
A fanny pack, that's right.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of laughing at kind of the conversation, but also, like, I started this conversation by saying the deepest podcast on the internet, and we're now 7 minutes in, and we've talked exclusively about shitting and how to wipe your ass. So let's move on. But it's amazing how much of a self-contradicting person I can be. Yeah, so good. My first actual question is, so the problem of the soul in the Old Testament was something that blew my mind. Like, I was like, I couldn't comprehend the idea that, that, well, I grew up as a young Earth creationist, so I believed that there was 4,000 years at least before Jesus existed, that we had. So like, and the Earth's 6,000 years old, obviously. So I'm guessing I believe that 2/3 of the time that humanity has existed, there was no idea of heaven or hell. And that was mind-boggling to me, because I was also convinced that Jesus was coming back like any minute. So I was like, how can, like, for 2/3 of the time, because, the other argument as well was that you always hear was like, how, what's the purpose what's the purpose of life if you just die and that's it? This is what all the apologists say. Ken Ham, Kent Hovind. What's the point of life if you just die and that's it? Who cares, right? And but it's like, well, hang on, like, God didn't feel to tell us for 4,000 years. That's interesting. Why is that the case? So my first question with that long preamble was, how did you first come to look at this question?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I have kind of a similar starting point as you brought up there. Like, I don't know, like, that I would. So I mean, I guess it's embarrassing to say, but I guess I was a young Earth creationist as well. Like, in my earlier years, like, I don't like to think about it like that, because I think, like, I like to think I was smarter than that, but I don't think I was.
Yeah,
but,
like, I wasn't, like, bought in. But that's just
I mean, it's just like
it's something
you get, right? It's kind of like Adam and Eve, and then the flood, and all these things, and you assume that they're real. And so, like, I mean, growing up, that was the kind of stuff that went in. I read the Bible a lot, learned a lot about the Bible, was good at that kind of stuff, but was definitely more inquisitive, I guess, than a lot of people, more willing to delve into the deeper stuff, to the questions. And so, like, I mean, so it was, it wasn't in vain that we talked about shit, because, I mean, I did go to YWAM, Youth with a Mission, because I was looking for adventure or whatever, but also because that was like a church sponsored thing. And then I could find a way to do some fun stuff, but at the same time, to keep it rooted in, in the heart of God, or whatever we say. It makes me cringe just saying it. I felt I vomited a little, actually. I'm sorry. But
there's that thing with YWAM. There's that thing too where, just to circle back quickly, is like, you have to ask. I don't know if this was the case where you were, but you have to ask all your friends and family, get essentially to sponsor you to be overseas. And I remember like so many times one of my friends who did YWAM, actually the first guest on this podcast, Colin, he mentioned like he was like, oh, my friend, I haven't heard from him in 15 years. He wants to like grab a coffee. And then to find out only it was essentially like, hey, can you be one of my sponsors when I go overseas and have a great time? Yes.
Yeah. So I did a lot of fundraising in my church, but the thing is like, so I was just too good at the fundraising. So I got so much money like that I more than covered what I needed, right? But the money just kept coming in because people kept sending stuff, and I'd send a report home and more money would show up. And like the church had to give it to me because they had raised it with tax benefits for the givers and all that. And then it has to go to the thing they raised it for. And so like I kept getting my account filled up, and and there's all these people that like haven't met their goals. So I was like secretly paying for like everybody else's like fundraising goals to be filled up so that people could go on their outreaches and stuff like that. So like I paid for like half our team, I think, to be able to go out like to Nicaragua. And but I also like on the weekends, like, some people are like eating like macaroni in the kitchen, and stuff like that. And I was out like having restaurant meals and stuff like that.
So your mission work was like pretty like you're like kicking it for some of it.
Yeah, I mean, so it was this weird thing, like, because you're living like out of handouts and stuff like that, but at the same time, like, you're
eating better than like the people at home who are sending you the money. You're like,
it was kind of awesome. It's weird looking back on it. But like that was, so I met this girl. I met my wife there. So that was like, it was a good thing. But she's Norwegian, and that's literally why I live in Norway now. But she was in ministry school already in Norway. And so like, she wasn't really interested in moving to the US. She had just wanted to take a break in Hawaii. So we pretty quickly found out that we wanted to be together. So I moved over to Norway, and the easiest way to get in was just to go to the school where she was studying, which is a theological institution. And it's where I work now, actually. And so like she was doing her ministry degree here. And at that time, so I moved like, so I moved in 2002. So right after 9/11, we were doing the process of trying to get visas and stuff worked out. And so things were still pretty lax back then. And so like the institution was like, sure, he can come and study here, but he'd need a visa. And the Department of Immigration was like, well, yeah, if you give him a spot, that's fine. Then we'll give him a visa. But then he needs a language course. And so they contacted the University of Oslo, and they're like, yeah, we'll give him a language course if you give him a spot at your school and you give him a visa. And they're like, oh, wait, but he has to have funding. So we need a bank. And so the bank was like, yeah, sure. If you guys give him that and give him that and give him that, then we'll give him a bank account. And like everybody got on a conference call, like an old fashioned, like everybody had a phone.
Wow.
And they just all said, so if you say yes, we'll just go around the circle and everybody say yes, and then we'll just approve his stuff. And they did. And so I got all this approved, but then I had to study theology, and like European studying theology is different than going to Bible college, right? Like it's a full-blown multidisciplinary thing where you do you do biblical studies, you do systematic theology, you do practical theology, you do church history, like you do this kind of full-blown thing. And even though this is a fairly conservative university, or it was, especially traditionally, like still it's within the academic study of theology, not a Bible school thing.
This is something we should actually touch on, because a lot of my my friends that I guess are still like they're in church. I won't say still. That's but they're at church. They will often not know the difference between, I guess, theology and like church history or the historical method. Can you touch a little bit about like the difference between theology and like, because often I see, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, often I see is like theology is like a way that we try to make observations about or try to explain characteristics of God, It's like it's already assuming the premise. You will never like find a theological reason, I guess, not to believe in God. It'll just be reasons that we can fit things together. Where the parts that I've become more interested in recently is like, did the Exodus really happen? Like, is that a historical event? And like, if it wasn't a historical event, why are these stories written down? Are they taken from other ideas and things like that? And we will be talking about that soon on Patreon. Just a little wink. But anyway, could you tell us a little bit about that, like the difference between theology and like history?
Yeah, well, so I think the word theology gets used in like at least 3 different ways, probably a lot more, but like we generally use it like in 3 different ways. And one way is kind of what I was describing. Like it's like theology is this, I guess it's probably comes from the German tradition, but it's the European tradition, whatever, that theology is this kind of all-encompassing thing you do when you study Christianity. It is then it's like you've got all the different ways of thinking about God or trying to get to God or talk about God. And so you have to learn about the history of God is part of that. So it's like, then you have both in biblical studies or in the church history, the way God is, whatever. Then you also have systematic theology, which is more philosophical thinking about how you make the ideas of God work together, whatever. And practical theology is how to do church, how to do ministry, things like that. So it's like this big idea that all of the things that are related to godness in the Christian tradition, you just call theology. And then you could also then make a separate branch, which you would call like Muslim theology or Islamic theology or Hindu theology or Buddhist theology or whatever. Like you can ways that people do these things. So that's like one way we use theology. But then the more like specific way that people use theology then is like the things where you're trying to talk about God within those things. So like, how do we think about God, talk about God? And in that case, I do know atheist theologians. Like you can be an atheist theologian where like in the German databases, I'm listed as a theologian, right? And so I would be an atheist theologian because I can discuss with you theological principles. Like we can talk about atonement and we can talk about whether or not it is a logical conclusion that by having a man that claims to be the son of God or whatever dies, whether that is then something that could be on behalf of a good God or whatever. And, then you're talking about the ideas of theological doctrines, but you can reach very different conclusions. And so you can be a theologian and work with theology and end up coming to the conclusion that the arguments for the God or for the doctrine aren't convincing. And then there's like a third way that we talk about theology, which is methodological. And then that's where we really get into the difference in the way people do stuff. And that's, I think, at the core of what we're going to talk about today, because like if you are working theologically with texts, you're going to be trying to come to a conclusion that supports or at least gives you evidence for the doctrines or the theologies that you want to have, and they're generally prescriptive in nature. And so you would say, okay, so is there an immortal soul? Let's just begin there. And you would say, well, certainly if we're going to end up with Jesus, then there must be. If there's going to be a heaven and a hell eternally, there must be an eternal soul. Therefore, we look at the Old Testament and we'll find the places where it's ambiguous and say, there it is. There's the evidence.
Yeah.
And then it will say that then you should use this information to believe in Jesus and do his thing. Like that's kind of a theological method. Whereas a historical method would say, what are the texts saying in their original contexts?
Yeah.
And so then we would say, okay, there definitely can be a change in context and a change in theology over time, where you can say, okay, it seems like Jesus is more, or Paul at least seems more optimistic about the division between the body and the soul and the body and the spirit. And maybe there's some stuff there. Definitely in the early church, they're very keen on the eternal soul. It shows up. Like, so we see there must be something. But as we look back on the Old Testament, like, well, there's less evidence for it. And then we need to be asking, well, why would we assume it? How can we break down through the language barrier of ancient languages, ancient concepts? How can we study this? And then we can just accept the conclusions that we come to as being the best answer we can give right now. And within a historical method, then when new evidence comes to light, you can reevaluate it, and you can then ask the question, what do we now know? And so it's a very methodological thing.
Something you said there really kind of rang true for me, because when I was in ministry college, I did a year of ministry college. I got a certificate for nothing amazing, but they would always say that you need to look at the Old Testament through the lens of the New Testament. Yep. There is no looking at the Old Testament without looking through because otherwise they actually said it'll cause you issues and problems and everything.
Right. Right. And that's what I would call a theological method.
Yeah.
And so like when I teach students Intro to the Bible, like that's one of the things that the first day I go through is the difference between doing it theologically and doing it historically. And what I tell the students is that I will throw things at them if they mention Jesus when we're talking about the Old Testament. That it's like, and because and then we'll go through and talk about different methods and things like that, and then we get to this thing that I call reception history, and I'll say, okay, when we get there, you can talk about Jesus. Okay, it's fine. Like, but let's look at it historically first, and then sure, like I know that many of them are theologically oriented and they're Christians and they want to read it that way. And it's like, okay, fine, but let's start with reading it historically. And then if you're going to use it through the lens of the New Testament, at least you know that you're looking at something that is changing shape because of the lens. Yeah. That you're not thinking that the lens is giving you a clearer view, but it's actually distorting the view.
That's actually a good way of looking at it. It's distorting the view rather than, it's like it's like cellophane makes everything a different color, right?
Yep. I mean, Paul said it. He said, now we see as though foggy in the mirror, and then we'll see sometime we'll see clearly. Like I'm not good at the New Testament. I'm sorry. But, Paul has that.
I'm not either, and so I can't actually pinpoint where you're talking about. We should actually do one time. I don't know if you can ever drink on this podcast, but if you could ever drink on this podcast, we should do what Kip did when Kip came on and drink straight alcohol, and we'll do a theological happy hour where it's just I just throw like questions about atonement and like hard problems in theology, and we just beef it out for an hour and a half.
Anytime. I will definitely. We'll just have to do it at a different time of the day, because not 9 a.m. for you. I'm not going to drink, so we have to find a time that works for both of us.
It'll have to be over the weekend. So how did you first come across this problem? This.
So when I started studying here in Norway, because I mean obviously I ended up in Norway, and they first I had to do a year of Norwegian studies so that I could go to the Norwegian School of Theology. It's kind of important. And the first year is kind of this intro to all the theological disciplines. You do all this stuff. You have some Bible and some theology and stuff like that. And then the second year you start on this, that's just the system in Norway is kind of, you do everything and then you do it like a little more specifically, and then you get into even more details on the top. It's like when you study theology, you have like 5-6 years of theology. That's it. And so in the second year we had a course that was on anthropology in the Bible. So like the ideas of man, what is man in the Bible? And for that, then you had to pick a topic to write about, and basically you get a list of the different words in Hebrew or Greek that are in, that reflect different parts or different ideas of man in the Bible, and you just write about one. And so the word that I went for is the Hebrew word nephesh, which is generally in modern Bibles is the one that will be translated as soul. And so by picking that, I just thought I was just gonna you kind of sail through, because that was a word that's used like 700 times or something. I was like, there's plenty of stuff. And for me, I think going into it, my thought was just like, and obviously I'm just going to talk about where our soul cries out to God and things like that. And I'll be, I don't think I even thought very much about it. I just figured it was an easy thing. And then I started reading, and the first thing I read, says the idea of an eternal soul in the Old Testament is highly problematic. And I'm like, what? Like, what is that? What does that even mean? Like, that it's highly problematic? Because I have an eternal soul, right? I am Christian. I will live forever. That was the yeah. And so it was just this weird thing. And then when you start to work through the literature, it becomes apparent that we've been reading a lot through the lens of the New Testament, of Christian theology, really, even more than the New Testament. 'Cause the New Testament's still a little iffy on the whole thing. But like, the basic thing is that the consensus is that there's a very strong connection between the idea of the soul and the body in the Hebrew Bible. Like, the body is the thing. And then I'll go into more detail here in a minute, but like, because just kind of seeing that when you start to look up all these verses where things are described, like the connection of what happens to you when you're dead, what happens to your body and things, and all this kind of stuff, it's like, actually, the body is where it's at. And then you kind of go and look and you say, okay, well, but surely it's in the New Testament. And then you realize that in the New Testament, all that they really talk about is the resurrection of the body. And this really big thing in the New Testament is the resurrection of the body. And then it made me think, oh crap, maybe there is something there. And so I start going into the details of this, of what the soul is. And you find out that this word doesn't mean soul. Like Nephesh, it's only soul if we define what a soul is in a certain way.
It's like, is it like retrofitting it, like retroactively fitting? Is that the word?
It's retrofitting it by saying that so when we think of a soul, what we think of is some kind of completely separate entity that inhabits us for a bit. And in that sense, you can find that there are some similar ideas in the Hebrew Bible, that you're not just body, you're not just flesh. But the question of whether that thing is pre-existent or post-existent is completely different. Does it last? Does it exist before you, and will it last forever? And then there are just so many clear texts in the Hebrew Bible that say that death is the end. And that's what then hit me the hardest, I think, was understanding that, like, there is not an eternal life, but there is eternal death.
It's, even when you say that, it's like, it's kind of the oh geez, I don't know, I'm getting a little emotional. It's kind of weird, but it's even as you say that, it's like, that's kind of the battle cry about, essentially, like a big reason why I do this podcast, because I think that ideas like this need to be kind of explored by people, but also, like, of big ideas, deep ideas, because I truly came to realize, like, well, I truly came to be convinced, I will say, that this is probably our one and only life, and that's it when we die. And to live, don't sweat the small stuff. Live your best life. Think deeply. Eat delicious food. Drink wine, but not too much. Like, drink Coca-Cola, right? Like, to really, like, get the most out of life, and to be fascinated and amazed and at awe at what we find here in this existence.
Yep.
But because like, the idea that a lot of people, like, kind of hearing this will be like, it's confrontational to hear the idea that we might not exist forever, that we might not see our loved ones again, and things like that. And then there's probably another group of people who are watching this and thinking and feeling relieved. Oh, I'm glad. Like, eternity of anything would be horrible. Because otherwise it wouldn't be you. Like, it would be some pseudo you that can enjoy the same thing over and over and over and over again. Like I'm glad that I've got my time, and then I stay alive in the memories of our loved ones. Like, it's a really, this topic is big, and it's bigger than what it looks like on surface on the surface.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right about that. That, I mean, for me, it was a relief to realize, like, oh, but if there's if it's just eternal rest or death or whatever we want to say, like, then I have motivation to have a good life.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, the kind of Christianity I grew up with kind of said you need to have a shit life so that you can have a good eternity, right? And it was this kind of martyrdom, like, complex, this suffering complex that this kind of Christianity has, that really affected me and made me think, like, I shouldn't want too much. So I went and saw the movie Women Talking the other day. It's it's a movie that's just come out recently about it's kind of based on idea of a true story, but it's not really a true story. So it's kind of based on loosely on things that could have happened or something. But it's Mennonite women living in a Mennonite colony where they're like sexually abused, and then they're trying to decide whether or not they'll leave the colony and try to make it on their own. And there's just this one scene that, I mean, because so much of it rings true to me as the dialogue in the Mennonite world that I grew up in this religious world that that kind of limits what you're allowed to think is the way you act in the world. And one of the things, the scenes, is where there's this one of the girls is saying, I want this, and I want that, and I want that, and one of the older people says, one of the older ladies says, well, want less. And like, that is kind of what I felt like was the church's tone, the Mennonite church's tone, is like, want less. Like, if you start to think that you could have more, that you could be more, you could do more, think less of yourself. Like, don't think you're going to enjoy life.
It's
and
like
that limits you just so much, especially growing up like that. And so to find out that you're just going to be asleep for eternity, it's like, oh.
It'll be very similar to how it was before you existed. It probably will be very similar to that for the 13.
I have no recollection of it.
Or you go to the same place that a flame goes when you blow out a candle. Like that. It's and let me tell you, like, let me tell the audience, I should say, is people, you need to go to Derek Mythvision's channel and check out your full story, because, like, I almost, like, this never happens. Like, I'm not even though I've got emotional just before, but I almost teared up, like, hearing the story about what you guys went through. It's incredible. Go over to Mythvision and check it out. I'm sure a lot of you are from Mythvision, but there's some parts in that I was wondering if you could give us, like, a bit of a like, tell a little bit of your background, because you went through a lot. Like, you were in the mission field. You really, like, if there's someone who really felt like they had to, like, put in everything to get to, not to be, I guess, rewarded in heaven, but it's like treating life as like a doormat that we wipe our feet on, but not in a way where you're trying to help other people, but you're not. But it's like, it's not, this life is nothing. It's nothing in this life,
I think that, well, I mean, it's, I think that's, it's just so hard to make it clear looking back, like, where I was. but like I fully believed it, and I didn't go into the mission field, leave for Mali, West Africa, a few hours down the road from Timbuktu, literally, like because I hated myself, or because I just thought the only way that I can do anything is to do good works or something. Like, I was a committed Christian, and I believed that when Jesus said, "Sell everything, give it to the poor, follow me," that's what I was doing. I really thought I was living out the gospel of Jesus Christ. Like, that's what I did. And we actually literally did it. Like, we sold our house. Like, we literally sold our stuff, and we
so you sold your house, everything.
Sold our house, and literally sold our house, sold our car, and moved, like, to Africa, and used our savings to survive there. Like, I mean, we were getting a very modest salary from the from the mission, to live on, but it didn't cover everything, and we had 3 kids, and we needed to take care of, so we did, and we helped people, and we had we had interactions with people that obviously we were trying to help, and we did it, and we truly believe was what God wanted for us, and that we were doing that not to enrich ourselves, but because we were standing in the faith and doing what we're supposed to. So I think, like, it's pretty easy for me to just kind of like say, "Oh God, I was so stupid," or "I see now, like, the religion had done this to me," or whatever. But like, when I was in it, I was fully in it, and there was, like, looking back on, I can say, like, yeah, I think I went to those extremes because I was really trying to fulfill what was asked of me. And for me, there was just like, there was no way of thinking, let's say we're fully committed and then not sell everything and follow Jesus. Like, it just seemed like such a hypocritical thing to do for me, because I had the opportunity, right? Because I was able to do the thing they wanted. Like, they wanted me to go and translate the Bible into this language, and I happened to know the Bible pretty well and Hebrew pretty well, and know the language, and I was a linguist and I was a theologian, and it's like, I couldn't imagine somebody more qualified to do the job they wanted me to do. Yeah. And so it was like, yeah, of course, that's my thing, so I'll do it. And so it was like, I interpreted all that as God having a plan for my whole life and leading me through everything. And so I really went, like, all in. And so for me, that was something that led me to a place where it could go that wrong as it ended up being. Like, and this was one of those things that, like, when we were in Africa, obviously things went horribly, horribly wrong. Like, I mean, we came to Mali at the absolute worst possible time you could have come, when the Libya war had been going on for a little while, and what it meant was that the place in North Africa where it's the Al Qaeda and in West Africa had been kind of housed and staying. They were kind of forced out because of the war, because then, like, Gaddafi wasn't protecting them anymore, and there was all these arms that were now available, and they had, like, apparently raided different armories and stuff, but then moved into northern Mali, where it's kind of a lawless state anyway, and they just kind of kept coming further and further south, and that's where we lived. Like, we lived in, like, the northernmost outpost that was supposed to be safe, and it was just like a really, really stupid place to be with a small family. Like, it was like, and I mean, this is one of those things that I look back on and think, like, why didn't it ring any bells? Like, but like we had the French Foreign Legion stationed in town, right? And so there was this big base, and they would be out. You would run into them occasionally, and like, we saw them at the pool and stuff, and they got to know me, and like, assumed that I was U.S. military or military intelligence or something, and I kept saying I'm a Bible translator, and they're like,
okay,
like, good cover, like, and they're like, you're
wink, wink.
kind of strange that you brought your family, you know, but okay, whatever. And like, and then they would talk to me as though I had like information, and they must have thought I was really, really, really good because I never gave them anything. Um, but, but also like once I was out running, because I would run. I'm a runner, and I would go out in the desert and run, which was like one of my favorite things. Like to just like you feel like, I mean, there's this crazy feeling of being out in the desert right in the evening when the sun's starting to go down, and you're just kind of out there. The sun is giant as it sets over the horizon, and you're like, you're just like you feel like you're a million miles away from where you grew up, and so it's like this kind of magical thing. But like a couple times I came across the French military doing target practice or doing different things, and so one time I came running up and turned around this corner, and there was a big like a Humvee with gunners on it and everything, and the guy like looks at me, he's like starts talking to me in French. I just stopped there, and I was like, oh hey guys, what's going on? I'm just trying to like, and they're like oh, just out running, are you? And I'm like, yeah, I just gotta stay in shape, you know. And then the guy's like said something, you're a bit far from home, aren't you? And I was like, do you know where I live? And he's like, of course. And then like it hit me like, oh yeah, like we're one of like 4 Western families in this town, and of course the French Foreign Legion knows exactly where I'm going to be. Like
well, weren't your children were in school, and there was a terrorist attack on the school?
Yeah, well,
right?
I mean, it wasn't. I wouldn't call it a terrorist attack, but it was definitely.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, because it was, but it was a
like a riot
mob.
or something, right?
Yeah, it was a mob, a riot that was a student demonstration, or kind of a young people's demonstration that just mounted based on frustrations about working with the French and like the way French intervention in Mali has gone. There's a lot of animosity by obviously because of colonialism and all that kind of things, and so like the French school in town was the obvious place they would end up, kind of exerting their frustrations, and so it was pretty wild. Like the way the students went up and they encircled the school, and like I wasn't allowed to go up and get the kids. I had to kind of stay behind because it was too dangerous for us to go out there. But because this was like the school for the better educated people in town, I guess, a lot of the generals in the military, like in the Malian military, had their children there as well. And so like as soon as this started happening, they locked down the school and called the military. And so they did. They came, like the full-on Malian military came and surrounded the school. And apparently there was some violence connected to it. But so the kids were physically fine, but emotionally, I think we're still waiting to see the worst of the damage from that, you know. And that's like kind of one of those things that we've reflected a lot on afterward, is both our fear and our experiences, and the kids, you know, fear and experiences and pain and stuff like that, and the way that everybody kept telling us God protected you, God protected the children, God protected you all from all damage, you weren't murdered. Like when like there was an attack in the town when right after we had left, and our director, African director, was like in his home when there was this like mass like terrorist. This was a full-on terrorist attack, and like it was in his backyard, like in the hotel right behind his fence. And so they had to like lay in cover for a couple of days, and it was really bad. And he, you know, like still like their whole narrative was like God protected us, God protected everybody. And then when you realize how damaged we are emotionally from this kind of stuff, and it's like, oh my God, like we were not protected. Like you're not protected emotionally. You didn't get out of it okay, unscathed emotionally. And so that mental health aspect is just so.
You got look. People can go and talk and watch your amazing interview on Derek's channel. Because it's and you really should, because like I'm just like I could sit here and I'm just blown away by your story. You got asked to go back to the mission field, like you're like, hey, and the church was kind of like, well, you're kind of perfect for the role, like God will protect you, and
Yep.
and it's incredible.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing story. Everyone go check it out. But let's just circle back around to the topic at hand. But before we do that, I got a couple of things. One, Skeptics and Scoundrels said, my brother did this twice. So he sold everything because he thought God was directing him to simplify and move to where the need was greater. Yep. Both times he ended up back at the same location where he started, having to rebuild all over again. It's
very familiar.
Yeah, it's crazy. And yeah, I just think about how many times, like the will of God was always a big thing for me. Like, am I following the will of God? And I remember feeling really guilty going to film school because I was wondering, is it the will of God? Like, or should I be in ministry? So you've got an amazing YouTube channel that's just blown up. The Bible is written backwards. You can go at Bible Monger and check it out. Links in the description. Your videos, like so I'm on my other account at the moment, but I have watched these videos, at least most of them, when I get time. Really good stuff, really educational, really awesome. You also have a website people can check out. And you will be coming back on Deep Drinks in it's like a week away, but we've got the second 10 days away. We have a second episode of the slavery panel. And this time we're going to be just dealing with apologetics. It's going to be much lower key, much less work for all of us. But it's going to be really good. It's just responding to the apologetics, getting through that document, and we've had a few people kind of make videos which have been I guess good comedy, I guess, for us in the group chat. But yes, it's going to be a good episode. So if you are new here, this is a place where I have deep conversations with people over a drink of their choice. So make sure you subscribe if you like content like this, because we have some more awesome stuff coming up. So Dr. Matt, Dr. Mathew Monger.
Yeah, Matt, you don't even have to call me doctor. I'm not. I'm whatever you want me to be, man.
Okay. Well, I'll save it for when I'm in another episode when I'm in drinking. I have some inappropriate jokes there, but let's go with so you've got some slides you want to show us that can help us lead through this problem.
Let's walk through a little bit of what I mean when we talk about whether or not there is a soul, or what we want to do with it. So the main thing is that when we do this kind of thing, like you have to remember that the Bible isn't a singular entity that was written at one time by one person, and it's not obviously then it's not inspired by a singularity that always then gives you exactly the same meaning for every word, and always the theology is consistent. I mean, this is very, I think for me, this is very obvious when you read the Bible, because there's so many things that just like you have to really work hard to make them make sense together. And so like what my interest is then is seeing how different things come to light when we look at things in different ways. And so then we one of the things that we do when we look for this soul, so basically there's you would ask what concepts could be there that we would consider a soul, what is being translated as soul. And basically there are only a couple of things that could be conceived as that in Hebrew, in the Hebrew Bible. And one of them is what is traditionally translated as spirit, or something, which is ruach in Hebrew, which really means like wind, or breath, or spirit. And this is what is in like Genesis 1:2, where like the Spirit of God was over the waters and things like that. It's probably means more like the wind of God, or the moving air of God, or something. I don't know. But so you would have this kind of spirit thing that is in some texts, and then you could ask, well, is that what a soul is? And then think, well, it seems that is more like the that's more like spirit than soul in a way. I'm not sure I know the difference between a soul and a spirit, but there's something there. But then there's another term, which is the term nephesh, which is the term that is used in the creation of mankind. And so I think that's where we should kind of start to look at it. And so this verse here from Genesis 2 is describing the creation of man. So the first man. So the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, or the dust, the clay of the dust of the clay, or whatever, the soil of the earth, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. And the word that is used here is the word nephesh, which is the word for soul. So the man, being clay, after being breathed into, becomes a living soul. If we use that translation, it becomes a living soul. Okay, and this is one of those important things, because what we see is there's two elements to the man here. It's the ground that he comes from, and the breath of life that comes from God, and these two elements together make him into a living being. Now, so this is the word in Hebrew, right? It's nephesh, and we read right to left. So there's the n and the p and the.
Isn't that little symbol on top of the S? Doesn't that mean something else? I heard
that's a diacritic. It's a really important symbol in.
But doesn't that mean something about like slavery wasn't?
It definitely means there is no such thing as God. Because it's pointing down, you see, so it's saying that nephesh means that the soul goes down into. Please, if you're ever anyone listening, we're just making fun of someone else. I apologize.
We're making a joke about it. Go watch the slavery panel. That's
and the next slavery panel, I will be doing a bit more on that. But anyway, so what we have here is a word that in Genesis 2 also has the adjective living connected to it. So it's a living soul, a living nephesh. And the same term is used about other creatures in Genesis 1. So
dogs go to heaven, is what you're saying.
Well, see, I would say the opposite. We all go to hell.
Okay.
We'll all be in the grave together. We'll all be in the pit together, which is I would like my dog to follow me everywhere. So it doesn't matter which way we go, as long as we're together. This living creature thing, the living thing, is a bodily thing, and it has to do with the fact that we are animate objects, right? Yeah. So there is something there that it has to do with the ability to move and to speak and to do and to be something more than just a rock or a tree or a bag of clay, right? And so that's when so you become a nephesh when you have the breath of life in you, some kind of life. And we see then, if we look at it historically, that the word nephesh actually probably originally meant throat. So this is a pretty common development, I guess, that body parts develop semantically to mean wider and wider things. So we're pretty embodied in our languages often. And so when we see the development of the nephesh, we have the throat there, but then it would then be connected to breath, right? And so that makes sense, because your throat, like that's where your breath is. And so there's this connection between what the place in your body and then what we associate with it. And the verb that comes from this same root. So Hebrew is this very fun thing where these three consonants that we have are they can be nouns, they can be adjectives, verbs. They get modulated with vowels and prefixes and suffixes to have a lot of wider meanings connected to this same central semantic term. And so these same consonants, when it functions as a verb, it means to breathe. And so that's very central to it. So a breathing thing, right? Could be one definition that we would use of the nephesh. And then by extension, then it means those who breathe, right? So we have the creatures, and it's both human creatures and non-human creatures are described as nepheshes in the Bible. And then in a further kind of I guess call it a further abstraction of the concept, then it also can be used as the self, right? So it becomes your identity as a self is connected to this word. And so we kind of moved from the concrete to the more abstract. And the word nephesh is actually also used in the Bible as a reflexive pronoun, not in a woke pronoun way, but in a I tried to make a joke. It didn't work.
No, sorry. You're like, just so everyone knows, Matt is he's super red pilled. He hates all that. No, I'm kidding. We're just kidding.
If my pronouns are nephesh. But so what you would use it like if you say I myself saw him or something, like myself, you could use nephesh to express that.
And I will from now on.
Yeah, I nephesh. My nephesh saw him.
I nephesh, didn't I? Anyway,
okay, we're headed down the slippery slope now. And then it could also mean life, right? So a life or living and things like that. But it also means appetite in a number of verses, right? So it's like the desires of your being. And so it's like there's all these kind of abstract things connected to it. And then another way that it's looked at is also as the soul. So the identity, the personal identity that's there. And our friend Dan McClellan has written a lot about this concept actually in his book. So that you could pop that up on the screen too, something that people might want to check out. But I'll ramble a little while you look for it. Because he has basically discussed this exactly the thing that we're talking about. And I told him this too, because I'm like, my biggest fear is that I'll say something wrong and then Dan will go on TikTok and vanquish my nephesh to Hades or something. Like he's good. There we go.
If you go to his link tree, link, oh my gosh, whatever, this URL, I'll post it. He's actually got the book for free. So you can buy it from Amazon or a bookstore, but he has also made it available for free. It's called Yahweh's Divine Images, A Cognitive Approach. I mean, this isn't just like a look at this thing. Look at this thing.
It's like it's a full-on academic book. It's published. It's his PhD dissertation published. It's just it's a really good book, and he builds up. So basically he's talking about the divine and the way the divine is conceived, or way Yahweh is conceived as a divinity. But he kind of gets there by way of talking about what are the traits of humans, and what traits then are assigned to the divine, and how do these things relate. And so one of the things then is this question of, where is agency, or where is identity located in man? And that is described in a couple of different places in the Bible. You have heart is used a lot as a place, and then sorry, I'm getting too handsy there. Okay. And
I can see where your brain went, and then I went there, and then we both just decided not to say anything. We're on the same wavelength. Yeah, that's good.
But anyway, so
I'll bring up this.
And then and then you've got this identity thing that's kind of seems to be the idea is that it's the nephesh. And so in some texts, it does seem like the nephesh can be associated with being away from the body, right? So it's like the term Dan uses and people uses it, like it's partitive. It's something that can be extracted from the body in certain situations. And this is kind of one of those things that is most difficult to track in the Bible, because like the Bible, or the Hebrew Bible, is not at all concerned with giving us doctrines of what will happen to people after death. There are a few places where we have death described, and then you have to kind of be very careful in how you talk about these things, because in a lot of cases we just don't know what's being envisioned, like what will happen. But if we look at a couple of examples of what's going on, we see like in Genesis 3:19 already, in the same story as creation, then this like kind of the other end of the reference is, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And this is one of the things that, like, I mean, people read this at funerals still, like this is a pretty normal thing, like, you know, from the earth you've come, to the earth you will return. And then like in the Christian saying, they say, and from the earth you will rise again, or something. And but like this bit is really clear that like there, it doesn't say you will return to the dust and your spirit will live on with God forever and ever, amen. But it's like, that's it, like you're dust, right? So there's no dogma of something eternal happening here. So, you know, and that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it's not in the text here. Then like we have something like Ecclesiastes chapter 12, where it says, and dust returns to the earth as it was, and the breath returns to God who gave it. So this is, I think, pretty clearly playing on the same verse that we just read, from dust to dust and all that. But like, so it says, and the breath returns to God who gave it. Now, this isn't the nephesh, this isn't the soul, but it's the breath. But what it seems like is that in death, the assumption is that your body returns into the earth, and the breath just returns to God. And I would say not in the sense of that your little breath retains an atomic thing outside of God and hangs out with him, but it's just like when you breathe out and you breathe in, you've returned the breath into you. But it's like, it's not the same, but it's like you can't say, oh, I got that little molecule, and you're like, it just continues, you know. So I think like there's some room for this is one of the verses that people would say, oh, look, your spirit returns to God. There you go. So people go to be with God.
Yeah. So this is like looking back at it with the lens of the New Testament. Is this what translation is this, by the way?
So I'm using the New Revised Standard Version for everything. Yeah. And another one that I really like is Psalm 82, where it says, you are God's children of the Most High, all of you. And this is like talking to the gods. And nevertheless, you shall die like mortals and fall like any prince. And so this is kind of the transition into talking about what is the difference between talking about the soul as being something that exists in the texts and talking about the soul as being something that's eternal and undying, because those are two very different things. And again, I feel like every time I say something like that, I just have to remind everyone that I'm not saying that I'm talking about whether or not the soul exists. I'm talking about whether or not texts are identifying the soul as something that exists.
There's a difference, yeah.
Because I have literally no, I would say I have no cred in the world of identifying whether or not souls exist. And I don't think any of you do either. Like, I think that's always going to be this thing, like, okay, I feel, but
you can go to a psychic will tell you.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's okay. Sure, we're going to get to a psychic here in a minute. Like, this is perfect. But so when we talk about this, like here, the idea is that we're contrasting the eternal nature of a god, the immortal nature of the gods, with the mortal nature of humans. So humans die, and this is something that is a constant. Sorry, my Norwegian just started popping out. I'll try to rephrase that. So this is a constant throughout history, is that people died. And when they died, they weren't resurrected. And so like people's bodies disappeared. And so we get this concept in the Bible of that people's bodies return to the earth. And they do. Like this isn't an imagination that plays in. Like it's pretty pure and simple. Like you bury people in the dirt and you go dig them up 10 years later and they might have some bones left, but their bodies are gone. And then you wait long enough and the bones will be gone too. And it's just a fact of life, as we say, that death is there and decay happens. And so we see, like, you know, in the mummification practices of ancient Egypt and things like that, that you would want to keep the body if you could. Like there was also a longing to find out how can we maintain the body even after death, because the body is so central as the place where your other things are, right? And so when you have your body and your identity connected to the body, then when you die, then you would need a place for something to go if it will continue. Otherwise, it ceases to exist. And so that's one of the things that that Dan talks about in his book, is that we do have like some evidence of like monuments being set up to be the place where the soul can abide, so that people remember it. And this is something that you actually said in the very beginning that I wanted to jump on, but I felt like we needed to get to the point where we could do it. You said like that when you die, you hope to live on in the memories of your loved ones, and that's exactly what we're dealing with. Like as long as your soul is remembered, your personality, your you is remembered, then you do in a way live on. And so it's like if it's a tombstone or whatever, there that could be where your soul is, right? And so we have this idea that that you live on forever, but really what it is that you live on as long as the memory is there. And then what is it that gets remembered? Well, the body is already dissolved, and so we must be thinking about something else. So we're thinking about your personality or your life or your whatever, because it's not the thing that animates you, because that's already blown away. So it's, again, then you end up with this thing. So we can call it the soul, is what you can remember. But that also doesn't mean that thing is distant or is in heaven or whatever. So we'll keep going through a couple more here. Psalm 104 says, when you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. Again, this is like a super easy to understand description of what happens when people die. They stop breathing. So the breath force goes out, they return to dust. So again, like doesn't say, and their soul goes to be with Jesus, you know, when their breath departs, they return to earth. Okay. So I feel like I'm just keep saying the same thing over and over again. So then there, I see in the chat, Science Explains wants to talk about this, and so what I really like about this comment is that you use the word soul. So the author of 1 Samuel seems to think there was a soul, particularly in 1 Samuel 28:15, where Samuel ascends from Sheol. So,
thank you for the comment.
The author of 1 Samuel doesn't use the word soul. And so this is a pretty important thing. So this is the story of King Saul, who realizes that things are going very, very badly, and he needs to figure out what he's going to do. So he needs to consult Samuel, the prophet, but Samuel's already dead. So what do? Well, you go find a medium, a diviner that can get in touch with the dead. And so he heads to Endor, which is the place where this person lives. It's not a witch, it's a medium, or something you might have heard the story is called the Witch of Endor or something like that. But anyway, so Saul goes and he asks the woman to do this, and she says, no, I'm not allowed to. And then he convinces her to do this, and the woman says, whom shall I bring up for you? And he answers, bring up Samuel for me. And the woman saw Samuel. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. And the king said to her, have no fear. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a divine being coming up out of the ground. And he said to her, what is his appearance? And as an old man is coming up, he is wrapped in a robe. And Saul knew it was Samuel. So the thing about this text is that it describes a body. Like, what it doesn't say, and the soul of Samuel came out of the ground. There's nowhere that the soul is mentioned here. What do you see? I see an old man. Or she said, actually, I see a divinity. Like, I see a divinity, and it's an old man. He's wrapped in a robe. And so, like, what is described here is seeing something that is unexpected and is divine, right? And so it's not saying I see a soul or I'm contacting his soul, but it's like this idea of the bodily resurrection, the bodily contact is down there in the grave, in the pit. And this is basically like the idea is that when you try to contact someone on the other side, their nephesh, their soul, whatever, would have to be housed somewhere. Like, it would be like, if it's not connected to a monument or something else, like, where is it going to be? And it's like, it must then still be there. Like, it's there with the body at that point. In this case, like, there's, if there is any soul, it's connected to this figure that is in his body down in the pit.
Right.
And
so
yeah.
So is it like the soul is an interpretation of this, that the soul exists, is the nephesh exists, but it's not this eternal thing that kind of, it's not dualistic. That is, it is part of you. It's a physical, or not physical, but it's like, once you destroy the body, you've destroyed the soul. Like, it's gone. Right.
And that it's the basic idea, I think, is that in many of the texts that we looked at, and the general kind of background concept is that the body is you. And in you, then there are different ways of conceptualizing your feelings or your different parts of you. And some of that then can be conceived as being outside of you at certain times. Like, it's not like it, so this idea of what makes up you is primarily connected to the body, and primarily disappears when your body disappears. But as long as you're remembered, then someone can think of you and can try and connect with you. But that seems to be envisaged as being connecting with your body even after death.
Interesting. So it's much more. It's much more of an interesting concept, really. Like, it's deeper than you kind of a plain reading.
Right. And so what, and like, just kind of one more time to circle back to Dan's book, what Dan sets up is this kind of way of showing that the major difference between divinity and humanity, one of the major differences is that the divine always get remembered because they're worshipped. And that's like the whole point, is that the divine are worshipped and remembered daily, and through the rituals they set up a remembrance, so that in the end, like, they are eternal and immortal because of the continued worship of them. Right. And so the moment that something ceases to be remembered, it ceases to exist.
So interesting. We recently just had very first interview, actually. Let me just quickly pull it up. Cult of the Dead, Kyle Smith on. He wrote this book called Cult of the Dead. Have you seen this? Did you check this episode out, or do you see
I started watching. I didn't finish it, but yeah.
It just incredible the way he describes, because he essentially makes the argument that Christianity is a cult of the dead,
right?
But not in the reference, not in like a negative way. He talks about like agriculture being about the care of the land, or culture being about the things that we care about. And so it's like, so cult of the dead is the idea that Christianity is about the care and love and respect and of the very special dead, their martyrs, the saints, things like that.
Yeah. And I think that's
interesting.
that's a pretty good description of it. I mean, I think it's a fun thing to play with those kind of concepts of saying, was Christianity a cult of the dead? Is Christianity a pagan blood ritual religion? It's like those things like that. Like I question was that I saw the other day was like, did God did God rape Eve? Like that's the and it's like
it's very. The Christians have left the chat.
Yeah, but it's like it's such a good question, and it's so surprising that it surprises people to ask it, actually, because this is something they were asking in antiquity as well. Like there's I mean, there's all these kind of things like, how exactly did we get the divine into the next generation? Because God breathed into Adam, and then he took a rib and made Eve. Okay, like, but then what about, like, where's the, like, is it just because Adam had breath? Like, how do we get, and so there's all these things that people have been thinking about for years and years. And so there's one other thing I want to throw in there before we just open up to craziness. But I want to just mention the thing that there's a couple of places that kind of illustrate this phenomenon in the opposite way in the Old Testament. Because there are two places where people are just taken up to heaven or something. And so that's Enoch and Elijah, that both like don't die, but are taken into heaven. And the way it's described is again bodily, right? So it's not like they're described as having in Enoch's case, it says like, and he walked with God, and he was no more. And so like all of the other patriarchs are described as dying. And with Enoch, he gets to go be with God. And this is something that people found very strange later in antiquity, because it's like, well, what did he do? Like, what does it mean? He just, like, he didn't die. Like and so it's not saying that Enoch was parted from his body and gets to go hang out in his soul in heaven or something. No, it's a bodily thing, right? Yeah. Just like we later see with Jesus. It's not like you couldn't like write the New Testament and say Jesus died, but his soul won against the devil or something. Like he spiritually defeated whatever. Like
even Jesus bodily rose to heaven, right?
He bodily rose to heaven. He got lifted up, man. I mean,
that's super.
According to the texts,
something I found really interesting, and you suggested I read chapter 5 of this book, which it was fantastic to read again. I skimmed through it. Fantastic book by Bart Ehrman. He talks about, I think it's in this book, but he talks about essentially like the idea, even in the idea of the New Testament, he kind of puts forth the idea that there is no hell, even in the idea of that Jesus didn't think that there was a hell in the New Testament. And he also put forth the idea that, and I don't think this is controversial at all, that there'll be a new heaven and a new earth, there'll be a new Jerusalem, right? And my favorite way to think about that, and I never thought about this when I was a Christian, was you could drive your car there. Like I think of it like it's physical, as in like I could like, we could get a barge over there, and I could bring my car, I could bring the pets, like it's wild to think of it like that, where you never think of heaven in the New Testament as that. You never think like, oh yeah, I'll bring my stuff. Like
it's and that's so. I mean, I will get there eventually. My plan is to get through all different kinds of literature on my channel and talk about these kind of things. But one of the videos that I will do eventually is the prophetic stuff, and especially Isaiah is super fun to look at, because Isaiah has this really interesting tradition where it kind of plays on like the second part of Isaiah plays on two different themes. And the first, like, so chapters 40 to 55 kind of play on the Exodus theme. And because obviously the context is we're on our way back to Jerusalem, or we've just come back to Jerusalem or something like that, and out of the Babylonian exile. And it's like, God, free us, take us straight through the desert. So it's playing on all these Exodus themes. But then the final 10 chapters in Isaiah are where we get this New Jerusalem concept. and it makes such perfect sense that these are written when they've come back to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem sucks. It's been destroyed. It's a shithole. And they're like, what do we do? It's in ruins. And they're like, the dream is this place is going to be awesome. God will rebuild the new Jerusalem. And then it's like, it makes so much sense. Like, it's supposed to be a physical place that will be the home of God's people forever.
Yeah.
Like, not in that all the people will live forever, but that the city will live forever. The nation will live forever. And like,
it makes sense when you think of the original concept of Messiah, where Messiah is not supposed to be how Christians have envisioned the Messiah. It is meant to be like an earthly king that fought back the Romans or whoever was against Israel, like fighting Israel at the time, and like took and made Israel into a great and glorious nation. Like, that's what the Messiah is. Like, well, I think it just means anointed one, but that's how that's the Messiah that we're expecting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the first time I talked to like a Jewish scholar about this, and just kind of asked, like, but what do we do with the claims of Messiah? And he was just like, but he didn't do anything. Like, it's like, it's really easy. Like, there's literally one job for the Messiah, and if you haven't brought about the kingdom, like literally the opposite happens within 30 years or 35 years of Jesus' death. Like, the nation is gone, the kingdom is gone, and the temple is destroyed. And so this is the opposite of protecting, rebuilding, reestablishing. And so like, and again, it's the earthly thing. It's it's only when we really move into the later apostolic period and into the early church that we see that, I mean, this dualistic idea of the body and the soul or whatever are two different things, and that these are, one is fallible and one is eternal, and all this kind of stuff, that we get this projection of I guess of those ideas back on the earlier texts, and start saying like, oh well, what we really need is like this spiritual Messiah or whatever. And it's just like, you don't see that in the text. Like, there's not in the Hebrew Bible, there's not a tradition that what we need is a spiritual Messiah. Like, what you need is a physical one.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got some questions for you about this, and we're almost at time, but I'll try and slam through them.
We can ramble a bit more from my perspective as well.
Awesome.
I'm the one that's been talking too much. So
no, this is exactly what we want. We actually, and just before, well, if you got time, actually, I will mention this. Skeptics and Scoundrel is in the chat. He's a patron. Thank you so much for your support. But I do have to shout out. You mentioned before how you love like hard questions, or like questions that are like kind of like, did God rape Mary or whatever. Yeah. His channel has just passed, one of his videos just passed 100,000 views with
awesome.
one of the best questions. Could God not kill children?
Yeah, I love that, because it's a really easy one.
Yeah,
it's like easy answer. Yes, God could, like this, and this is why I'm an atheist. Like, because any what if game you play, like if you have to end up saying he could, but he could avoid this horrible thing, but he does it anyway, and that's always the answer. Could God stop this? Yes, he could, but he hates us. Like,
it's good too, because it gets around that stupid, like, because you know how, like, there's that argument on apologetics, it's like God is infinitely powerful or whatever, but it's like now they've changed it to he's maximally powerful. It's like that it gets around that problem as well. It's like, because it's like, well, I could envision a God maximally powerful that didn't have to drown babies in the Great Flood, and then what's the other apologetic you'll get? Those babies were filled with Nephilim. So therefore kill them. Like,
exactly. So I love that. I love that kind of thing. I'll check it out.
I actually, I think I'm not sure if I've watched the whole thing through, if I've even checked, but I keep seeing it and thinking like, I've been so busy, but I can't wait to watch it. And
Yeah,
I'm going to be on his channel soon.
The only way around the problem of evil is to water down the God. And yeah, I totally agree. And I occasionally I have students that come and ask me the hard questions, because I do. I mean, I do this kind of thing in class too. Like, somebody will ask me something, I'll just like start rambling and we'll get totally off track. But like they'll like, I had a couple of guys come to me a couple of years ago, and they're like, and they give me that look, and I'm like, all right, this is going to be a good one. And they're like, how can God both be all powerful and all loving, like full of, and I'm like, okay, what do you think? I'm like, what do you think? I'm like, what do you think? And they're like, well, it seems like it, he would have to choose to not be the one sometimes so that he could be the other, or whatever. And I was like, or maybe he's not. And they're like, and it was like this shocking moment when like an adult person says, says like, yeah, maybe you need to rethink that. It's just like, it's just like, it's such a funny thing that we have these contradictory dogmas that if you don't think about them together, it's fine. But when you think about them together, then you get a problem. And like, that's that cognitive dissonance that is just like such a random thing. Like, where, like, like, where do you go when you die? Like, we like, Christians have a doctrine of the resurrection of the body, right? That's the doctrine. Like, okay, maybe not all Christians, but that's generally the church's position. It's the resurrection of the body. So where do you go when you die? You go in your grave and you wait. And you hope for that resurrection. Like, that's the doctrine. But what people actually believe is that their friends or uncles or whatever are with Jesus.
Yeah.
Today. And then Matthew, they say, well, Jesus said it on the cross. And what's this?
According to Matthew Craig, thank you for the comment. According to the Pew research, 60% of US adults who believe in heaven believe people definitely probably have perfectly healthy bodies. The idea that bodies linked to souls is quite common in XTY.
Thank you. That's awesome. I really, I appreciate those statistics, because that's what I feel actually is the thing. When you talk to people, like, it's really hard for people to imagine what they are without their body. But they really want to be able to be better than they are as well. And so, like, that idea of the perfection of the body is a really funny thing. But I guess there's some, I don't know. It's there's a lot of psychology there, I think.
There's this one. So when I was reading this book, this fantastic book, people should read it. There's except the Audible version isn't available in Australian Audible. It's so annoying. Same with his new book.
You haven't found somebody with an Australian accent to read it yet?
No, it's like you can go to when you go to Audible, like, you can go to audible.com, but then there's an audible.com.au that we have to use if you got an Australian, and it's not there. Like, it redirects you, and then it's like,
VPN? Do you know about VPNs?
I'm thinking, I have got a VPN, but then I have to use a different account. It's so annoying. Anyway, rant over. But there's a scripture, Deuteronomy 18:10-11 says, "Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughters in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts out spells, or who is a medium or spiritist who consults the dead."
Yes. Yep. And so, this is what we see. That's what we see in 1 Samuel, right? Consulting the dead. That's a medium consulting the dead. And then you ask, what is the dead that we have in the one description we have of this? That's 1 Samuel, and it describes a body, and the medium is blown away by the body that she sees. And right. So it's like, yes, you can consult the dead, but that's because the dead that are remembered continue to exist, but they're connected to their bodies. And so I think that's like, it it doesn't mean it's eternal. That's the point. Like what it means is that as long as you remember someone, you can think about their personality, you can think about their soul, you can think about them, and they still seem to be in most cases connected to that body, but that might also be connected to a monument or something that could be established to remember that person, to cause the memory of their soul to live on.
So that's kind of your reading of it, right? Is that I mean, this gets tricky because we're going into theology, but is that a theological reading of, is that a consensus theological understanding of it, or do most theologians kind of take the apologist route and kind of read in the New Testament into the Old Testament?
So actually, I mean, so up until very, very recently, the consensus view has been that the Hebrews couldn't conceive of a separate soul from the body. Like, so I mean, like, so when I was preparing for this, like I had a chat with Dan, because Dan knows more about this than I do, Dan McClellan, and he made it very clear that the consensus is actually, the consensus would sound even better for me to talk about, but that's not probably the best reading of the text. So like the earlier consensus is just like is probably more influenced by the particularist view of the Bible, to say that the Bible is different than the surrounding cultures and things like that, and say that they just didn't really see the soul as something different. And so that's been the scholarly consensus view. But of course, the conservative consensus view is that your soul exists forever. And so then they would point to like Jeremiah, I knew you when you were in the womb, or before you were in the womb, and say, see, that proves that God knows everyone before they exist. And so therefore it's the pre-existence of the soul. So there's that kind of, so there's always going to be verses that are read and interpreted that get pointed in this direction, that the soul is eternal. People will look at it, but I think that at the very most, what we can have the text say is that the soul is occasionally described as being separatable from the body, partable from the body, but it's not conceived of as being eternal, because that's literally the whole point, is that man is mortal. Like you cease to exist at some point, and in all ways.
So there's the difference between like the soul and like the eternal soul, and that's like the line in the sand, I guess. There's like, you're not saying that there is no soul in the Old Testament, but you're saying there's no like eternal soul, is what the reading is, right?
So, one more time.
So there's a difference between, I guess, like the soul, or what's that word you use? Nephesh.
Yeah.
Nephesh. And there's a difference between that and like the eternal soul. Like there's a different, like you're not saying that there's no soul or there's no Nephesh, but you're saying that.
Well, what I'm saying is that there definitely is, like, that people are trying to describe where their personality, where their mojo is, whatever we want to call it. And so like, where is the seat of your personality? Where are you when you're you? And that is something that does exist. Like, because we have consciousness, like we think of it as, I guess, as our brain or whatever, doing all this stuff and gives us the ideas and gives us these things. And then we conceive of things like in our heart is our emotions, or our gut is where we have the intuition. Like we use the body to talk about different ways, different places that we are. And so we have this, but we tend to think now that there is this thing that could float out of us and still exist completely separate from our body. Like, I mean, then like, it's a good like movie image of it. Like, you kind of go out, but then how is that? Like, what is that? Is that a mirror of the body? Is it is it a shadow of the body? Is it like a shade or whatever? Is it, what is that thing? And so like the the texts we see seem to point very clearly that in a lot of cases, once the body's gone, then there just isn't anything left for you to be.
Yeah.
But so that like that, then in that case, your soul dies with you.
Yeah.
But then when things are described as being able to exist after death, it doesn't mean that thing exists forever. But it's a memory of you, and therefore your personality, your mojo, whatever lives on. But it only lives on in that it is remembered.
Yeah. Okay. There's something that there's the area that we didn't get a chance to fully kind of discuss, but there's the maybe we could just quickly touch on it, the concept of Sheol. Because you hear a lot about it in the Old Testament, Sheol. And to me, when I was a Christian, I always imagined that as like a waiting place, like kind of like hell, but like there's not like kind of like hell, but no punishment yet. It's just kind of like you're in this dark area just waiting for the actual So can you touch on what Sheol is historically?
Yeah, I mean, Sheol, so it means the pit or the grave. And I think that's basically where what it is. Like it's just the place where you are. It's physically it's your grave, and it's where you go, and then your body disappears in that thing, and so then you're just there, and it's just a place of darkness, and there's nothing happening. But what the Christian projection that I even hear you giving it is that it's waiting for the final judgment or something where you end up either going into the real hell or something else. And that's adding to what we have, because Sheol is like the very, very few mentions we have of it are basically just it's just like, of course you exist there in some way because you're not in the realm of not being there, but like it's just you're just gone like that, and that's where you are, like, and that's your eternity is just, and that's why I say, like, I don't think the Hebrew Bible has any concept of eternal life, but there probably is the concept of eternal death. It's like, it's just once you're dead, you're dead. And I think that's what is in the idea in the New Testament as well, that this kind of the idea of hell or whatever comes actually out of this Gehenna idea of the garbage pit, it's like it's a pit where you threw garbage and burned it or whatever, and then you're just there. It's not.
It's like a place in Jerusalem, right? Like outside of the wall. It's like a beautiful park now. Yeah.
And so it's like it's just what kind of pit are you in? It's like, it's a trash pit, but it's not that like there's a fiery brand sticking you every 12 seconds for all of eternity or whatever.
Yeah, it's not like South Park, the movie.
It's not like South Park.
Okay, so let's jump on to some last Q&A questions, and if anyone's got any questions, you can send them through. But I will end quoting before we jump into that. I will end quoting part of this book, which really helped me kind of understand heaven and hell a little bit better. Not that I needed to deconstruct hell too much, but it says Bart Ehrman, who everyone knows Bart Ehrman, he's a amazing professor of New Testament. He says, there is no place of eternal punishment in any passage of the entire Old Testament. In fact, and this comes to a surprise to many people, nowhere in the Hebrew Bible is there any discussion at all of heaven or hell as places of reward or punishment for those who have died. Probably most people who have read the Bible think of Sheol as a Jewish kind of Hades, a shadowy place where people go and all are treated the same, a banal and uninteresting netherworld where nothing really happens, and people are, in effect, bored for all eternity, which that does sound like hell to me. But in fact, in most passages of the Bible where Sheol is mentioned, in many, it may well simply be an alternative technical term for the place where an individual is buried. That is their grave or a pit. And it's like, it just wraps up everything you were just saying. It's like this isn't weird. This isn't wacky scholarship. This is
No. This is consensus standard stuff that it's and again, like this, but this is one of those things that like that the reason why a lot of Christian theology uses this thing of you have to read the Old Testament through the lens of the New Testament is precisely because then you can say things like, well, it's not really there, but the full revelation didn't come until Jesus showed up.
Yeah.
You know, and then then they run into a problem that even then it's still like people are still reading later theology into Jesus and Paul, but it's just like that's the way that most people think is like, and that's what's taught in seminaries too, is like the idea that how do you interpret the New Testament? Yeah, you find out what the Old Testament background is, and then you see what was made more perfect in the New Testament.
Well, that's the thing is like I remember talking to my my head lecturer at ministry college, and they said that like we won't know about the end times prophecies until after they've occurred, is what his perspective was. So he thought that like Revelations was, we would know what Revelations truly meant after it's occurred. Like we could look back and go, that's what it meant. But it's hard, he said, to look to what Revelation is saying and trying to fit it to what's actually happening now.
Yep. Which like is it? I would say is literally proof that it's not a prophecy. Because if you have to wait till after the fact and then say, this is the way I'm gonna fit this together to make sense of it, like, it's just such a great, like, that's literally why my channel is called The Bible Was Written Backwards. Because that is like, that's that kind of screwed up way of thinking in my mind, screwed up anyway, that you, when you look at things and say, oh, look, this foretells the whatever. Yeah, that's my hoe flying around there.
It's all great stuff.
Like what happens is that we get this Christian propaganda almost that is in the New Testament that says, look, that text meant this, and we didn't know it until we figured it out now. Like it's that negotiation with the old stuff. It's looking backward. It's not saying that we know that it meant something else before it meant what it says in the New Testament. But the interpretation within Christianity is that it meant it all along.
Yeah.
And the whole point is that no, it's not like written in a vacuum and they didn't know about it, and then they write their story and then they're like, holy crap, Jesus, like it's literally like like Matthew's sitting there and like reading Matthew's gospel is the most obvious example, because he like lays it out. He's like, he writes a story and said, this was done to fulfill what was written. And like, and all you need to do is just take, this is done, and put, I wrote this to convince you of what was written.
Yeah. And it's the same thing with what you were saying before. Like if you take the Gospels one and you go, okay, that's what it says, and then you go to the next one. But if you read the Gospels side by side, all of a sudden the little contradictions start to pop out. Like, who was Joseph's granddad? Who was, when did Jesus die on the cross? Like, So I have a few.
Pregnant.
Yeah, exactly. I have a few quick questions. But someone asked before, who's been asking amazing questions. Zeb, it's nice to see you. I'm sorry you have insomnia, but I'm also glad because you're asking fantastic questions. Zeb asked, "What are Dr. Bonker's favorite metal bands?"
Metal bands. Do you
get the do you know what the reference is there? Because Kip and I spent 50 minutes talking about metal bands.
I apologize, and this I'm gonna have to say is like the most embarrassing thing about my personality that I'm now gonna have to admit publicly is that I'm a country music fan. And I know this is as bad as it gets in some cultures.
No, that's
so that's like,
amazing.
I've never really been into metal. I had a punk rock period in my youth.
How punk rock? Like Dead Kennedy is punk, or like
like Dead Kennedys. But I was a good Christian kid, so I did a lot of like. So I think I felt like what I could play around people was like the punked versions of the classics, like Me First and the Gimme Gimmes, that did all these. They did like covers of classic rock songs in So
I think that same head lecturer, he was a youth pastor, and he wrote, Rage Against the Machine, killing in
Yes.
the name of.
Yeah.
He made it like serving in the name of dun
Oh, yeah.
serving in the name of.
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
So
Classic. I mean, it was a goof. It wasn't. We knew it was a
Yeah.
goof. Like he wasn't thinking like this is serious. Like
Yeah. So we we played, like, we even punked up some songs for worship sometimes for the contemporary service, and so be thou my vision,
so good, so
yeah,
good.
I hate my life.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Matthew Craig's.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No. Go on. Let's move on.
Matthew Craig said, "Do you think Jesus / Paul's understanding / teachings of the soul is different from what you have presented?"
Yeah. So what I think is that, so I don't know much about Jesus. So I think that the teachings that are presented in the New Testament, let's call it like that. I think that there is a subtle change from the time of the Hebrew Bible into the time of Jesus and Paul. Definitely, Paul has more a more dualistic view of the body, spirit, soul, whatever we want to call it. But at the same time, like, it's very clear that we're talking about the resurrection of the body, and so I think that. So I mean, it helps that I grew up in the Mennonite church because they're like, everything is like Jesus. Let's just take Jesus literally. Let's turn the other cheek. Like, let's literally be non-violent pacifists, because they said, pray for those who persecute you. Okay, then we will pray for them. Like, literally, like, what do you do if somebody believes you? Pray for them. Like, what, and so this kind of way of
and not pray that God will attack them or hurt them. Like, pray.
No, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
You should be praying that they will be well, and following things, taking the Sermon on the Mount literally, is kind of one of those values within the Mennonite tradition, and that is really, 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 really hard, right? But it means that you interpret things as the kingdom of heaven being here and now, and then what that kind of does is that you can think about things as being more literal. Like, so when it says that there will be a resurrection of the body, then you're like, okay, then my body will be resurrected. Like, okay, no big deal. Whereas when like, if you're used to taking things allegorically or whatever, then you think, it's not going to be the body. It's going to be something else. And so I do think that the reason there is a doctrine of the resurrection of the body has to do with the fact that the New Testament is teaching that that there still is something of intrinsic value in the connection between whatever else there is and the body. But I do think it's more nuanced, and definitely, I mean, by this time, Greek philosophy has pervaded things, and so there's a lot more knowledge of the existence of things outside of the body. And if we look at like the prologue to the Gospel of John, thinking about like the logos or Jesus or whatever is pre-existent, it seems like at least not all souls are there with him at that time. Like, I mean, so it's not like the eternal existence of the soul backwards is certainly not a thing. But forwards, I don't know. It's a little harder to say.
The Zebs has said, is Christianity's obsession with the afterlife a way of usurping the Greco-Roman idea of an afterlife, same as usurping pagan ritual dates?
Yeah, I mean, I would put it slightly differently. I would just say it's a reception of them. Like, I think usurping gives this idea that it's in some way a bad thing. But I just think it's just this is what is literally the human way of doing anything, is that you pick up on the culture and traditions that you're aware of and you integrate them in the things that you do or say or think or write or whatever. And so it's just a natural thing that because Christianity comes out of the Greco-Roman world, that it's going to be taking the Hebrew traditions and then reinterpreting them in light of the new context. Okay.
I want to ask, I've got a couple last questions and we will wrap up, but one of the major ones is I wanted to kind of get an aftermath from you for the interview you did with Derek. So for those who don't know, your interview with Derek was kind of, you wouldn't say it's like a coming out thing, or like, but like a lot of.
Oh, it was my first time publicly saying it. Yeah, it was. I mean, I've been pretty critical in some of my videos I've done on different things where I haven't hidden my my atheist tendencies or something, but I've never told the story and said like straight up that I'm no longer a believer or whatever. So yeah, it was a pretty much a coming out party. I don't know.
And it has been a party, like it's blown up, like it's gotten a lot of views. And so have you had much of a response to that? I'm curious to have you had friends or family or people reach out to you and say good things, bad things, anything in between?
All of it. I've had a ton of responses. It's been pretty overwhelming actually the past couple of weeks, just kind of sorting out all the different voices. It's been a lot of really good stuff, like several colleagues, several people that I'm close to that I've never really talked to this about, that reached out immediately and were really supportive and really kind, and made me very aware that I'm safe, and things like that. And so that's a good feeling. And family as well, that have been definitely been most of the family anyway. There's a couple of examples that don't really like it, and that's always hard to be told, like that you're making bad decisions or whatever. But then I'm like, yeah, it's bad decisions, exactly, like, because your faith is a decision, right? That's it's just a fun thing.
Like you can choose what you believe.
But like I the weird thing for me is just the sheer number of people that feel the need to comment or to write to me and tell me like where I messed up. Like it's like they watch my video, and so this is like, I mean, when I'm talking about my history, like I've been thinking actively about myself as a non-believer for 5 years probably, and I've been like through the past 5 years before that was really struggling to figure out what kind of identity I was going to have after I had realized that I couldn't be that kind of Christian anymore or whatever. And so and then before that, was fully devoted reading, but I read a ton of stuff. I've studied. And so, but people like write to me as though I'm basically a 16-year-old who doesn't know anything, like saying, oh, well, you should read this book by William Lane Craig, then, or you should read Gary Habermas. He proves the resurrection, things like that. And I'm like, do you think I haven't read that? Like you should read N.T. Wright. Yeah, dude, that N.T. Wright is one of the reasons why I'm not a Christian anymore, because I got introduced to a concept and then I saw how poorly it was argued. Like it's been a part of my journey, like doing these things. Like I have worked through it, but it's not stuck on one little thing that I say, and then they're like have to get in and attack it.
It's I just went to the video now. It's got 126,000 views, which is wild. That's big for even Derek's channel.
Yeah, that's nuts.
But and I mean, you need to go watch this Bible scholar and missionary Dr. Mathew Monger Leaves Christianity on Derek Mythvision. I'll post it here. But like, it's interesting that you say that, because I said to you before, we were talking before, and I said that it's almost like people sometimes have to justify their doubts to you. It's like they get a doubt, like you bring up something, they get a doubt, and then they want to they find a way to get over the cognitive dissonance in their head, and then they want to tell you about it. And it's I mean it must be tough, because you probably had a lot of people reaching out to you.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's like in a way I totally understand it, like that's what people think, but it's just it's a big surprise to be confronted with it in that scale, that people people feel the need to just tell me all their why they think, or how they think I should have fixed this problem or whatever. And I'm just like, that's on you. That's I'm not at that place where I'm going like, man, I hope somebody can recommend a book so that I'll fix my faith, like, or that they'll tell me you should think about God in this way because that's gonna give you back the faith you need. Like, no, and like
I never once question. It's interesting because I never once go like, maybe I've got a wrong perspective. Like, I'm not saying all your friends or family post this, but yeah, it's very typical. I had an experience where we were moving houses. We built this house we're in now, but we were renting at the time, when we had a big garage sale, and I had a bunch of books out that I was selling, and one of them was a book that I'd never read, that was like a Christian book. It's called Living Water, and I was going to, and I was selling it. It was there for sale. And this lady asked me, "Oh, why? This book. I love this book. Have you? What do you think of it?" And I said, "Oh, I haven't read it." And she said, and I said, "It's not, not really something I'm really interested in." She goes, "Oh, why not?" And then she goes, "What church do you go?" "Oh, I don't go to church anymore." And she started asking me questions about my faith, and I said, "Oh, I've started questioning things. Why?" And "Oh, well, I came to think that the best way to, we should have good reasons to believe the things we have, not just faith and whatever." Got to the end of the conversation, and I'm like there, like people are trying to buy stuff from me, and I'm like talking to this lady who's like, I'm kind of, doing stuff, and she asks me to help her bring some stuff to the car, and I'm helping her bring like the stuff she bought to the car, and I think she had bought in the book, and then she'd given it, and she's like, "I bought this for you." So she's giving me back the book. Or I'm not sure if she did something. She was like, "Don't sell this book. You need to go read this book," and was crying and telling me that I needed to read the book, and that God was going to, save me and all this stuff if I read the book. And I'm like, lady, like, this is wildly inappropriate. Well, I didn't say that, but I was just like, I was kind of like trying to just get her out of there. But it's weird how it's, and Dark Matter has this video. Dark Matter, I've got the numbers, but he has this video where it's like when someone rejects God, like people, the same areas of the brain when you under an MRI light up when someone talks about self or they talk about God. That's why God tends to have the same beliefs about gay people, politicians, everything as you do.
Right.
So when someone actually says to you, like says that they reject God, it's very personal. It can be very personal. The idea is to people because it's almost like they're saying they rejected you. It feels the same as them rejecting you, but usually the person's being polite and kind, and I kind of like that idea because it explains why people get so heated and angry and upset when someone says, "I don't believe," or "I'm not convinced anymore," or "I'm an atheist." Like, it's just, that's crazy.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Okay. So two last questions.
Yep.
And these are fun ones. I ask these to a lot of people, and I'm very interested to hear, with someone with your expertise in languages, super interested to hear what you're going to say. So first one, what is the most plausibly true religion that you don't believe in?
The most plausibly true religion that you don't believe in, science.
You think religion's a science? Oh, science is a religion.
Sure.
Do you think?
I mean,
okay.
Sure.
Wait, you don't believe in science?
Well, sure, I do, but I don't. I mean, that's a good point.
Like scientism?
So yeah, I mean, so like, I guess that's, I just wanted to say science because it sounds like shocking. But I do believe in science in a certain way, but I don't believe that most of the knowledge that I have now will prove to be perfectly 100% objectively true or anything like that. So I think that our current state that we have moved to in our society is this idea that that if you have enough expertise, you can get to objective truths about things, and then that they will then solve your problems. And so I think in that way, it is a religious thing that we have a way of trusting blindly what happens. And then you have this movement against it, the anti-religious movement, where people say, "No, I'll do it. I have to figure it out on my own. So I'll do my own research," which means they probably go here on YouTube and listen to somebody or they read something, or whatever, and then they decide that they're gonna do whatever based on that they do their own research, and in the one way, like, you can never become that expert by just reading a couple papers or watching a couple YouTube videos. So you can never really do that, but you convince yourself that you can do that. And so then they set themselves up beside the god or the priest or whatever and say, "No, I'm just as much an expert as you." And so you have this kind of religious battle even going on between the pseudoscience and the real science or whatever. but like what we do know is that that facts change because we discover new things. And so like where we are right now is just like a stage on that journey to discovering more and more things. And I think that's like that's just the way it is. Like, I mean, like, so at any point in time, any religion is also changing and morphing and everything. And like, we might say that, you know, you have the same dogmas as the church. Well, like, Baptists didn't exist in the first century. I'm sorry. Like, they might claim that they were Baptists, but like, believe me, that wasn't the way first century Christians were thinking. And so like, so I just think like, but that's just a fun way of answering the question, since I don't like, I wouldn't put any credence on anything. So
so you're kind of saying that your religious belief would be science, but as in like science is objective and everything we know now is fact, and like that kind of pop science idea. The way it's used, where and you don't, but then in reality you don't actually subscribe to that. You think that facts kind of grow as we gain more knowledge,
right? And so one of the things that's super exciting is research that's done on the sociological construction of science, and the way like we can think that like so this is like Bruno Latour and like the it's called like SST studies and stuff, but it's super exciting because you can actually see that even in a laboratory that is supposed to be entirely objective, doing like physics or medicine or things like that, like what happens is that results are sorted and interpreted even before they are brought to the table. Like, why are we doing this experiment? Why aren't we doing another experiment? What are the experiments we don't even know about? What is this group of people doing? What are the structures between, the interactions between them that are leading to the discovery of this knowledge? What kind of all these things that interact that shape what the knowledge is and how it's produced have a massive impact on what we're doing. And so we will come to a point where we ask different questions and we do things in a different way that will lead to different results and different things. And that doesn't mean that I think nothing is real or anything like that. Like, I'm not I'm a complete relativist, but I do think that we have this idea that science gives us answers, and that those answers then are solid. And I think that like we're kind of stuck with the fact that we can only know what we know now, but probably what we know now will prove to not be the whole of it.
Interesting. I like to think of like the idea that like science facts kind of like evolve, not necessarily like kind of grow, not necessarily like change. But maybe I'm part of that religion, but like I definitely, what I always say is science is the best tool that we have to investigate the natural world. And I always put it back on the other person. What's a better tool? What's a better tool than the scientific method that we have to, like, because like it's like what's that other quote? It's like democracy is the worst form of government besides all the others. It's like it's the best we've got. Like it's like it's the best.
And I totally agree with that. I'm 100% a fan of the scientific method. I think that the way that science is used in popular culture and in the world then is something different than the method in and of itself. And so like, and I could say it too, like, I think that the practice of religion can be quite beneficial for some people. So I'm not like a radical anti-religionist either. Like I would say like where people feel they gain community and gain, let's call it peaceful tendencies, or feel that they feel like connected to a larger something that's good for them or whatever. Like I see the value, and I know that like also there's research that says like the feeling that someone is praying for you is also has the placebo effect of kind of increasing your chances of feeling better about things. And like it's fine. Like that doesn't bother me, but it's like we just need to differentiate between the methods and the actual realities that people are using them for.
So one last question, but before we do that, can you just quickly tell us what your next video is on your YouTube channel, which people should go subscribe to right now?
Yep. So my next one is going to be the Garden of Eden. We're going to look at images of gardens, the gardens of the gods, and the tree of life, in pre-biblical times and look at what might be kind of lurking in the background for the story of the Garden of Eden.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm not sure
And
if you saw my
walking and talking snakes. That's
that's cool. I'm not sure if you saw my cringe preach compilation with Derek and Neil, but we both preached. Me and Neil both preached about the Garden of Eden. So if you need any information, go check that out because
I did. I was at the gym when you guys were doing that, and I was on a treadmill for like 90 minutes or something watching you guys, and you guys just kept going and going, so I had to just keep going and going. And but like I was laughing out loud occasionally at how cringeworthy you guys were, and people were just looking at me because I'm like running, and like I burst out laughing. It was
it's so funny. You look like a crazy person. So and you've got your website, of course, people can check that out as well. You'll be doing some more stuff over there. And I just a little side note, thanks to all the new members. I am seeing some new members pop up. I don't have the list in front of me, but thank you for joining this YouTube channel. I really appreciate it. And we also have a Patreon. And this week for the 12 patrons, and you're one of them. You're one of the 12, the initial oh my gosh, where is it? You're one of the initial 12 disciples of Deep Drinks. So we'll be doing a live Q&A, an exclusive Q&A just for the patrons this week with a guest who I'm not going to announce yet, but it's going to be really cool. And then I'll be turning those into videos later on. So if you want to join the Patreon, now's a good time if you can afford to. Thank you so much, everyone. So the last question that we have is, and this is a good one. For you, I'm not tooting my own horn. If you could choose an afterlife, and it would become true, both good and bad for everyone, what would you choose? And so, an afterlife from a religion. So, because I thought maybe because Akkadian and all these
yeah. So, I mean, honestly, God, like it just depends on how you. I think I'm just so scared of getting bored of the same thing every day. So
I'm not going to let you give me like a milquetoast easy answer. You got to choose a real world religion with a wacky.
Religion. So I'll say my interpretation of the Buddhist afterlife would probably be it, that you just in a way become one with the universe again, and you kind of wink out of existence is definitely that would be where I would want to be. I don't know if you've seen the show, the Good Place.
Yeah.
And so it's spoiler alert, anyone that hasn't seen it, spoiler coming. For me, like just the way that show ends is like the final season like it really spoke to me. Because you get to this heaven and realize it's full of people that hate it because it's the same thing again and again. And like you can have anything you want, you can do anything you want, but it's like after a few billion years, like
even after a few hundred years, you kind of like,
yeah, it's just like, even, I mean, like, I feel like after a few days of doing the same thing, I'm tired of it,
Yeah.
And so like, and that is like, you can say whatever, like maybe your soul changes or something in the afterlife, but for me, it's just like the image of just, I think the way it's said is something like, it's just like water running back into the sea, and it just kind of, kind of dissipate into, and that for me is like that's that kind of Buddhist thought that you just become.
I do like Buddhism sometimes. Like that.
And so for me, that is that like, and that for me is, I think the reason I would then like that kind of total annihilation or dissipation or whatever feeling is just the fact that it then turns the focus back to this life. Because that was for me the greatest freedom in deciding or kind of coming to the conclusion that I don't have an eternal soul that's going to live on in punishment or glory or whatever, is I don't have to be worried about it. Like there's nothing on me to do anything other than make the most of this world, and I'm also responsible for it. Like it's for me, it's such a freedom to think that after this, we We don't know what's out there, but we will slide into it as everyone else has. But what we do know is how we are right now. And why not then make the most of this?
That's actually very in line with what I feel. Is I got a bonus question I just thought of. So a lot of people will, have you got any messages saying you just wanted to sin yet? Have you got any?
Oh yeah. And because I had mentioned drinking whiskey with Kip Davis on it, then it was like obviously drinking. And that's what they
really
told me. Yeah. You just wanted to drink.
Oh, awesome.
Because,
so
unfortunately, not unfortunately. I almost said something stupid. I'm good at like saying these things at the end of interviews. I say, but like I haven't indulged in a whole lot of these sins that people would say. Like I haven't been to the orgies and stuff that all these other atheists apparently go to.
Yeah.
Because I mentioned drinking whiskey, then they assumed that I left God so that I could drink
whiskey.
Yeah.
You kind of answered the question, but this question that I just thought of is I'm going to write this down as a question for deep drinks from now on. Yeah. But so what was the sin you left Christianity for? What was the main sin? It was drinking.
I think. Well, so in my mind, it was atheism, right? Because I grew up thinking atheism was a sin.
Okay.
But
it's the worst thing you could be.
Worst thing you could be. But yeah, I guess it must have been to do all this drinking that I do, which is why I chose to drink Coke with you here.
Oh, geez, isn't it amazing? Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you, Matt, for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's been really fun. We're going to have to do a theological happy hour with you one time, or another, how you want again. Guys, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you subscribe to at Bible Monger on YouTube as well. We'll see Matt when he comes back for the slavery panel, which will be a hoot. It'll be a lot funner, I think, than last time. Well, maybe not a lot, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be a roast fest.
I hope there will be less tears. It will be more, except for the apologists that are watching, who will
exactly. Well, thanks guys for coming out. I really appreciate it. And we're going to end on not the trailer for the slavery panel, but we have a purity culture panel coming at the end of next month, and we'll be releasing the names of the panelists in the next week. So we'll end on that trailer. I'll see you later, guys. Bye.